The photograph was taken in the autumn of 1902 in a quiet English village where nothing remarkable ever seemed to happen. The family of 5 posed outside their ivy-covered cottage, dressed in their best clothes for the visiting photographer. The father stood tall and proud, one arm resting firmly on his wife's shoulder. 3 children clustered in front, faces pale but obedient, each holding the stiff posture the camera demanded in those days. For decades, the portrait hung in the family parlor, admired by visitors, remembered fondly by descendants. But one evening, long after most of those pictured had gone to their graves, an unexpected discovery was made. Someone looked closer, and between the youngest child and the mother's skirt, faint but unmistakable, was the face of another. Its eyes were hollow, its expression twisted, and its features did not belong to anyone living. What was captured that day was no accident of shadow. It was something older, something that should never have been there. Before we continue with the story of the extra face in the family portrait, make sure to subscribe to our channel for more chilling tales where history and mystery collide. The village of Larkstone was the kind of place people passed through without remembering. A cluster of stone cottages nestled in a fold of the countryside. It had no great church, no market square, no industry beyond the fields and the small tannery that gave the air a permanent tang of leather and smoke. It was a place of seasons and silence, where the years rolled forward like the tide, barely noticed by those who lived there. The Turners were one of its oldest families, respectable and ordinary. Samuel Turner was a mill worker with shoulders shaped by years of lifting bales of cotton. His wife Margaret came from a nearby farming family. They had 3 children, Henry, aged 9, with a serious face that never quite softened, Alice, 7, lively and restless, and little Clara, not yet 5, with curls that framed her round cheeks. When the traveling photographer arrived, setting up his camera on the village green and offering portraits for a shilling, Margaret insisted they take the opportunity. A photograph was a luxury, but one worth paying for. The family dressed in their best garments. Samuel wore his Sunday coat, which was shiny at the elbows. Margaret pinned her hair carefully, smoothing the loose strands, and wrapped a shawl about her shoulders. The children were scrubbed clean, their boots polished though cracked, their expressions solemn. It was the sort of image a family might look upon for years and remember that they had once been whole. They stood outside their cottage beneath the shadow of a climbing ivy that clung to the walls like vines. The photographer adjusted his glass plate, drew the black cloth over his head, and asked them to hold still. The exposure was long, nearly half a minute. Children fidgeted, but Samuel's stern gaze kept them steady. The click came, the flash of light, and then it was done. The print arrived a fortnight later, sepia and stiff, mounted on heavy card. Margaret placed it above the mantel where visitors might admire it. Neighbors praised it, remarking on how serious Henry looked, how pretty Alice had become, and how Clara clutched at her mother's skirt with a hand barely larger than a sparrow's. No one spoke of anything else, for no one yet had reason to. The photograph was precisely what it seemed. A record of a family frozen in a moment of 1902. Years turned. Samuel died in the influenza of 1910, his body carried on a wagon through muddy lanes to the churchyard. Margaret wore black for a year, then another, before she allowed herself to wear any lighter dresses. Henry grew into a stern young man, apprenticed at the mill where his father had worked. Alice went into service in London, writing letters that spoke of endless staircases and complex tasks, but never of complaint. Clara, the youngest, remained with her mother until she married a railway clerk and moved away. Life was ordinary, marked by loss and work, small joys and small griefs. The portrait remained in the parlor, gathering dust, a reminder of when all 5 had stood together in front of the ivy wall. It was Clara's granddaughter, many decades later, who first noticed the face. The year was 1974, and the family had gathered for a christening in Birmingham. The photograph, old and browned with age, had been carried carefully through generations until it came to rest in Clara's possession. She showed it to her relatives, proud of the fragile link to the past. They studied the stiff postures, the old clothes, the solemn stares. Then one of the younger cousins leaned closer. "Who's that?" he asked, pointing. At first they thought he meant little Clara herself, but the finger pressed not at her round face, but at the shadowed space between her and her mother's skirt. There, faint but distinct, was a visage. The features were thin, the cheeks hollow, the mouth half open in what might have been a snarl or a grimace. Most disturbing were the eyes, dark sockets, not like eyes closed, but like holes. The face was too low to belong to any adult, too sharp to belong to a child. It was not part of the background, nor a crease in the print. It was there, pressed close to Clara's side, looking outward with an expression that turned the room cold. The discovery unsettled the family. Some laughed nervously, saying it was nothing but a flaw in the photograph, a trick of chemicals or shadow. Others whispered that such things happened, that cameras sometimes caught what the human eye did not see. Clara herself, by then an older woman with silver hair, grew pale. She said nothing for a long time, only staring at the face as though it was something she had known once and forgotten. Then she closed the album and put it away. The christening went on, but the photograph was not shown again. In the weeks that followed, Clara refused to speak of it. Her granddaughter pressed her, but she shook her head. "Best not to ask," she said. "Some things are better left in the dark." But silence rarely buries curiosity. The story of the photograph spread through the family, then beyond it, until even those who had never seen the image swore they had. People spoke of the extra face as if it were an omen, a mark of something that had haunted the Turner family for generations. To understand what that meant, one must look back further than the photograph, deeper into Larkstone's history, into whispers that stretched long before the camera ever came to the village. The land itself bore scars. Beneath the fields, the soil hid older stones, remnants of cottages burned in the plague years of the 17th century. Villagers claimed to hear voices in the orchard at night, voices that belonged to no living throat. Children spoke of seeing figures darting between hedgerows, shapes that vanished when followed. The ivy on the Turner cottage had long been said to grow too thick, too fast, as if it fed on more than soil. Margaret Turner was familiar with these tales. Everyone in Larkstone did, but she dismissed them, for a mother cannot raise children if she fears every shadow. She cooked her meals, scrubbed her floors, and sent her children to school. She prayed at church on Sundays and spoke politely to her neighbors. Yet she admitted once to a friend that Clara often said to someone unseen. As a toddler, she would sit in the corner, whispering and laughing, turning her head as though listening. When asked, she said she was playing with the boy. Margaret assumed it was an imaginary friend, nothing more. But one day, Clara told her that the boy lived in the ivy. The revelation chilled Margaret, though she told no one. She scolded her daughter gently, telling her not to speak such nonsense. Still, the child persisted, describing the boy in unsettling detail. Hair like smoke, skin pale, eyes that looked like holes. When asked what his name was, Clara answered with a word Margaret did not recognize, a word that made her hands tremble as if she had heard something forbidden. After that, Margaret tried to keep Clara indoors more often, distracting her with chores and sewing, hoping the child would forget about the incident. But children rarely forget what others cannot see. It is here, perhaps, that the roots of the photograph's mystery lie. For when the camera clicked that autumn day, Clara clutched at her mother's skirt, leaning slightly to one side. Her expression was not of fear, but of unease, as if she knew someone stood beside her. The others looked straight at the lens, their faces stiff. Clara's gaze was slightly turned, directed not toward the photographer, but toward that shadowed space where, decades later, another face would appear. The face in the photograph became a matter of family legend. Some insisted it was proof of haunting. Others argued it was nothing but a flaw, a chance blot of light and shadow. Yet the unease remained. Visitors who saw the portrait spoke of feeling watched. Some swore the face grew clearer each year, as if it pressed harder against the surface of the print. When the photograph was shown at gatherings, children sometimes cried, refusing to look at it. Adults laughed uneasily, yet glanced over their shoulders when they left the room. By the late 1970s, the photograph had become an object of quiet dread. Clara's descendants debated whether to keep it. Some said it should be destroyed, others that it was too valuable a piece of family history to lose. Clara herself refused to part with it. She kept it in a drawer in her bedroom, away from curious eyes, and when asked why, she only said, "It belongs to us." She died in 1981, and the photograph passed to her eldest daughter, who locked it away in an attic trunk. There it lay, gathering dust but never silence, for every so often someone would remember it, and the whispers would return. The question remained, who or what was the extra face? The answer lay not in the photograph alone, but in the hidden history of Larkstone, and in the stories the villagers told only when the nights were long and the wind rattled the shutters. The villagers of Larkstone were not strangers to whispers of the uncanny. Though the modern world pressed closer with each passing year, the old superstitions clung to the stones and hedgerows like lichen. Long before the Turners posed for their portrait, stories circulated of strange happenings near the very ground where their cottage stood. In the 17th century, during the plague years, Larkstone had suffered terribly. Entire families perished, their cottages boarded up, their belongings burned in pits outside the village boundary. Survivors told of a child who refused to die, though his family had long since been buried. He wandered the lanes pale as milk, coughing but never collapsing, his eyes dark hollows in his thin face. Some said he begged for food, though no one dared give it, fearing contagion. Others swore he sat at night by the churchyard wall, whispering to those newly laid in the earth. His presence became a terror, and one night the men of the village drove him into the woods, never to return. Yet for generations afterward, villagers spoke of seeing him in the corner of their eye, lurking near the ivy-covered cottages, a shadow child with hungry eyes. The Turners' home, it was said, had been built upon the very ruins of the boys' plague-stricken dwelling. When masons laid the foundation stones in the early 1700s, they unearthed a shallow grave. Inside it lay bones too small to be an adult's, curled as if in sleep. The remains were reburied in the churchyard, but the story lingered on in the house. Children whispered that the ivy grew so thick because it fed on restless bones below. Older women crossed themselves when they passed the garden gate, muttering prayers under their breath. Samuel Turner, practical man that he was, never put stock in these tales. He laughed at the talk of ghosts and dismissed it as superstition. Margaret, however, was not so sure. She had grown up hearing her grandmother tell the story of the plague boy, describing him with such detail that Margaret could almost see him in her mind. When Clara began speaking of her invisible playmate, Margaret's heart tightened with a memory she had long tried to push away. She wondered whether the face that appeared in the portrait was the same face her grandmother had once warned her about. The photograph had been taken without expectation of haunting, without any thought beyond preserving a likeness. But perhaps the camera had captured what the eye could not. In those years, many believed that photographs could steal something of the soul. Superstitious families covered mirrors after a death, fearing that spirits might be trapped in reflective glass. If a soul could linger in a looking glass, why not in a photographic plate? By the late 1800s, spirit photography had become a phenomenon. Mediums and charlatans alike claimed to capture images of the dead standing beside the living. Most were crude double exposures, easily explained. Yet those who had lost loved ones found comfort in the possibility. Was the Turner portrait a trick of light, or had the camera caught a lingering presence that had clung to the cottage for centuries? The more one looked, the less accidental the extra face seemed. Its contours were too clear, its placement too precise. The Turners' photograph showed not only their family but also something else crowding into the frame, something eager to be seen. When Clara's granddaughter studied it in the 1970s, she swore the face seemed younger than the children in the picture, though more withered, like a child both alive and long dead. To trace the truth, we must step back once more to the days when Larkstone was a smaller hamlet, scarcely more than scattered huts beside a winding brook. There are parish records from 1665 that mention a boy named Elias Cartwright, aged approximately 10, whose family was affected by the plague. His name is entered once, then struck through in heavy ink, as if the vicar sought to erase him. A note in the margin reads, "Gone into the fields. No burial." No burial meant no rest. Folklore scholars who later visited Larkstone claimed that the story of Elias became entwined with other village legends. He was said to appear in years of sickness or famine, a harbinger of misfortune. Children were warned not to wander too near the ivy wall, lest Elias reach out from behind it. Mothers invoked his name to keep little ones from straying after dark. Though centuries passed, his figure remained, stitched into the fabric of the village's memory. When the Turners built their life there, they stepped unknowingly into a story already written. And when the photographer raised his lens in 1902, perhaps Elias, or whatever shadow he had become, saw his chance to be remembered. Clara, as the years unfolded, never spoke directly of the boy again, at least not in ways that others could hear. But her diaries, discovered long after her death, told a different tale. In faded ink, she described dreams of a thin child who stood at the foot of her bed, watching her sleep. She wrote of hearing scratching at the window at night, though the ivy grew nowhere near the glass. She confessed to fearing the garden, where she sometimes found small footprints in the soil, though her siblings had not been outside. The entries are scattered, fragments of a child's fear carried into womanhood. In one passage, she admitted that when the photographer came, she felt Elias standing beside her, close enough that she could feel the chill of his presence. She gripped her mother's skirt not from nerves, but because she did not wish to let go. The diaries add a new dimension to the photograph. It was not an accident. It was not a random blot of light. Clara herself believed the boy had been there, leaning in, determined to be seen at last. The story of the extra face might have remained confined to family legend, but the discovery of Clara's diaries in the early 1980s reignited interest in it. Paranormal investigators were drawn to Larkstone, intrigued by the possibility of a haunting captured on film. Some claimed the ivy-clad cottage pulsed with an unnatural energy. One team of researchers spent a night within its crumbling walls, reporting whispers that echoed from the chimney, though no wind stirred. Another swore they saw a pale figure dart past the window at midnight. Skeptics dismissed these claims, pointing out the ease with which a suggestion could take root once a story had begun to unfold. But believers insisted that Elias Cartwright still walked the lanes of Larkstone, still pressed his face against the glass, still longed to join the living. Margaret's descendants grew uneasy with the attention. They wanted no notoriety, no strangers knocking at their door. The photograph was locked away once more, the diary sealed in a box. Yet even as they tried to bury the past, whispers spread. Neighbors remembered hearing Clara talk to herself as a child and recalled the way ivy grew thicker on that cottage than anywhere else. And older villagers recalled that in 1902, the same year the portrait was taken, a child from a neighboring family vanished without explanation. His body was never found. Some wondered whether Elias had taken him, or whether Clara's unseen playmate had demanded more than games. It is easy, of course, to dismiss all this as a coincidence, as the invention of fearful minds. But the photograph remains, and the face remains, stubborn as ivy roots clinging to stone. No explanation has scrubbed it away. Each attempt to reproduce the image has preserved the extra face as clearly as the day it was taken. Photographic experts have examined the plate, searching for scratches or flaws, but none suffice. It is there, as real as Samuel's stern gaze or Margaret's shawl. So what was captured in that moment of 1902? Was it Elias Cartwright, plague child turned restless phantom? Was it Clara's imaginary friend granted form by her belief? Or was it something older? Something that had dwelt in the soil of Larkstone long before the first cottages rose. The truth may lie not in what the camera caught, but in why it chose that moment. For haunting is not always random. It is often drawn to grief, to fear, to families who cling tightly together in the face of hardship. The Turners were a typical family, ordinary, struggling, yet hopeful. Into their photograph stepped a shadow that had waited centuries, a reminder that the past never fully dies. And so the family portrait became more than a memory. It became a message, etched in silver nitrate, whispering across generations. Look closer, it says. Look closer, and you will see what should not be seen. The years after the portrait was made were not kind to the village of Larkstone. What little success the village once had faded. Mills in bigger towns took away the young workers, leaving many houses empty and fields without care. The Turner family, like many others, tried their best to endure. When Samuel Turner died in 1910, the family suffered, but his wife Margaret stayed strong. Her children were old enough to help, yet shadows always seemed close to their home. In 1912, the first strange event tied to the portrait happened. A neighbor, Mrs. Pritchard, borrowed the photograph for a family visit. She hung it in her living room. Guests noticed a strange face near the mother's skirt. Mrs. Pritchard said it was only a mark on the picture. But that night, her youngest child was found outside in the frost, barefoot, saying a boy had called him from the ivy. The child fell sick with fever and never fully recovered. From that day, Mrs. Pritchard banned photographs from her house. Word of this reached the local church leader. He told Margaret to destroy the portrait. Margaret refused. She said it was the only image of her late husband. She called it a blemish, but hers to keep. The church leader wrote quietly in his notes that something unclean rested on the Turner home. In 1914, Henry Turner joined the war. Family stories say he carried the portrait with him into the trenches of France. Soldiers later claimed Henry showed them the picture, even the extra faint face. He joked that it was a guardian watching over him. But within weeks, Henry was killed in battle near a town called Ypres. His body was never found. People whispered the face had claimed him. Alice Turner did not escape either. She worked in London as a servant, writing fewer letters each year. By 1921, she stopped writing at all. Her mother, Margaret, searched for her, but no trace was found. Some said she left for America. Others believed she died nameless in a hospital. But the family feared the extra face had followed her. Only Clara remained at home. She cared for her mother until Margaret died in 1925. On her deathbed, Margaret whispered, "Keep it hidden. Do not let it look at them too long." Clara understood. She wrapped the portrait in cloth and placed it in the attic. Even in the dark, she felt it calling. Years passed. Photography grew sharper and clearer, but the Turner portrait stayed the same, with its strange face. In 1930, Clara's husband suggested showing it to experts, but she refused. She had grown up hearing about Elias, the plague boy. She knew it was no accident. That same year, a cousin begged to see the portrait. When she unwrapped it, she gasped. She said the face was clear, even showing its teeth. That night, she dreamed of a boy standing in her room with empty eyes. She left the next morning and never came back. In 1935, a young historian named Edward Lawson came to study local legends. He begged Clara to let him see the portrait. At last, she allowed it. He called it one of the best examples of ghost photography he had ever seen. He asked to print it in his book, but Clara refused. Still, Lawson later wrote about it in a small article, mentioning the plague boy named Elias Cartwright. Few read it then, but it survived for later years. The Second World War brought new pain. Clara's husband was killed in the Blitz, leaving her alone with 2 children. She became reclusive. Neighbors heard her whispering to the ivy wall, as though warning someone unseen. Her children grew up under the shadow of the portrait, though it was rarely shown. By the 1950s, Clara's son locked it away in a trunk. But when his daughter later opened it in the 1970s, she smelled something sweet and rotten clinging to the cloth. The same smell Lawson once wrote about in his notes decades before, and so the legend grew. The boy who died in the plague years, a child unsettled by new houses, a whisper in the ivy, a face in a photograph. If true, it was not only a ghost, but a hunger, something that grew each time it was noticed. By the mid-1900s, people feared Elias was not a lost soul, but a parasite. Each time the picture was seen, his presence grew stronger. The portrait was not only a record, but a doorway. The Turner family never agreed what to do. Some wanted it burned. Others feared that destroying it would set him free. So it remained passed down, hidden away, but never gone. In 1974, Clara's granddaughter uncovered it again. The extra face was still there. The legend came back to life. That is the cruelest truth about photographs. They do not fade like memory. They hold a moment forever, and if a shadow slips into that moment, it too will never fade. When Clara's granddaughter revealed the photograph in 1974, the Turner family had hoped the matter would end with that christening, the portrait tucked away in silence again. But silence is rarely obedient, especially where stories cling. The discovery of the extra face set off whispers that could not be contained. Within months, neighbors were asking questions. Some claimed they remembered strange happenings in the old Turner cottage. Others swore that they, too, had once glimpsed the boy in the ivy. The story spread beyond the family, carried by gossip and curiosity, until it reached the ears of people far beyond Larkstone. Among them was a young journalist named Peter Whitcomb, who worked for a regional paper in Birmingham. He had a taste for the unusual and a nose for stories that unsettled readers just enough to sell extra copies. When he heard of the ghostly photograph of Larkstone, he set out to see it for himself. Clara, then in her 70s, initially refused him entry. She had grown tired of outsiders poking at her family's grief. But Whitcomb was persistent. He spoke of documenting local history, of preserving folk tales before they were lost. Reluctantly, Clara allowed him a brief glimpse. Whitcomb later described the moment in his notes. The photograph, he wrote, was ordinary at first glance, a family arranged stiffly in front of their cottage. But as his eyes wandered, he saw it. The face. Not blurred, not vague, but startlingly precise. The sockets were dark caverns, he wrote, and the mouth hung open, not as a smile, not as a cry, but as though mid-breath. A moment stolen from something that had no right to breathe at all. Whitcomb published a short piece in the paper, careful not to reveal the family's name but hinting at the location. He framed it as a curiosity, a slice of local lore. Yet the effect was immediate. Readers wrote in, demanding to know more. Letters poured into the newsroom from people claiming to have seen similar figures in their own photographs, as well as from others who insisted they could explain the phenomenon as nothing more than exposure flaws. Soon, paranormal investigators came knocking. One group, calling themselves the Society for Psychic Inquiry, traveled from London in the spring of 1975. They asked permission to examine the Turner home and set up cameras, recorders, and thermometers. Clara flatly refused. She would not have strangers prowling through her house, stirring what she wished to keep quiet. But her daughter, wearied by the weight of secrecy, began to wonder whether exposure might at last lift the burden. She believed the family had carried the story too long, hiding it like a wound. Perhaps sunlight, she thought, would heal it. So in June of that year, against Clara's wishes, the portrait was shown to the investigators. They photographed it under different lighting conditions, magnified the image, and declared that no chemical defect could account for the extra face. One of them, a serious man with wire spectacles, whispered that the boy in the picture looked remarkably like sketches of Elias Cartwright, drawn centuries earlier in parish records. Clara, upon hearing this, burst into tears. She begged them to leave, to stop naming him, to stop giving him power with their words, but the investigators wrote their report. It circulated through paranormal journals, each retelling more dramatic than the last. Soon the Turner photograph was cited alongside the famous Brown Lady of Raynham Hall and other ghostly images said to defy rational explanation. For the first time, Larkstone found itself on the map, not for its history or industry, but for the unsettling presence of a child who should never have been there. The attention was unbearable for the family. Strangers sent letters demanding to see the picture. Tourists lingered near the old cottage, snapping their own photographs of the ivy wall. One man even attempted to break into the house, convinced the original print would prove supernatural power. The Turners, frightened, moved the photograph into a bank vault for safekeeping. Yet even locked away, its influence spread. In 1977, a copy of Whitcomb's article reached the desk of a BBC producer planning a documentary series on British hauntings. He approached the family, offering payment for the right to feature the photograph. By then, Clara was frail, her voice reduced to whispers, but her daughter refused. She would not allow her family's sorrow to be paraded on television. Still, the producer included a mention of Larkstone in passing, describing it as a village haunted by a photograph. The phrase stuck. Larkstone was no longer just a dot on the map. It was a legend. The family itself fractured under the weight. Clara's daughter insisted the portrait should be destroyed once and for all. Clara's granddaughter, who had rediscovered it, argued it was part of history, however dark, and must be preserved. Arguments erupted at family gatherings, voices raised over the fate of the photograph. In one particularly bitter quarrel, a cousin shouted that anyone who looked too long into those empty eyes would lose themselves. Silence followed, heavy and uneasy, for no one dared dismiss the warning entirely. Meanwhile, reports of strange happenings multiplied. A neighbor swore she saw a pale boy standing at the edge of her garden, though no child lived nearby. Another claimed ivy crept overnight across her wall in patterns that resembled a human face. Most dismissed these as hysteria, fueled by gossip and imagination. Yet those who had seen the photograph themselves remained unsettled. They spoke of feeling watched, of dreams in which the boy whispered their names. By the early 1980s, the legend of the Turner photograph had reached far beyond the village. Paranormal magazines reprinted Lawson's forgotten 1935 article, linking it to the modern story. Scholars debated whether Elias Cartwright had truly existed, scouring parish records for confirmation. Skeptics argued the photograph was nothing but a flaw, magnified by human fear. Believers countered that flaws did not linger across generations, growing clearer with each retelling, and through it all, Clara remained silent. She lived her final years in a small room, the curtains drawn, speaking little. When asked about the face, she only shook her head. Once, in a rare moment of candor, she whispered to her granddaughter, "He waited for me as a child. He waits still. Do not call him by name." She died in 1981, and with her passing, the responsibility for the photograph shifted entirely to the next generation. It was no longer a hidden relic of private grief. It had become an artifact, both feared and sought after, a piece of folklore that would not let go. In the summer after her death, the family gathered to decide its fate. Some argued again for destruction. Others feared what might be unleashed. At last they compromised. The portrait would remain in the bank vault, unseen by strangers, spoken of only in whispers. But even locked away, its presence hung over them, a weight that would not lift. That autumn, a final twist deepened the mystery. A historian researching the parish records discovered a note from 1902, the very year the photograph was taken. It described the unexplained disappearance of a child named Thomas Fletcher, age 6, last seen playing near the Turner cottage. His body was never found. The vicar had written a single chilling line: "The ivy wall hides more than stone." The discovery rekindled speculation. Had the face in the photograph been Thomas Fletcher, drawn into whatever shadow haunted the Turners' home? Or was it Elias Cartwright, centuries old, claiming another victim? The answer remained elusive, lost in the tangle of history and fear. By the end of the 1980s, the Turner photograph was both infamous and inaccessible. To some, it was proof of life beyond death. To others, it was a fraud, a stain of chemicals mistaken for spirit. But to the family who bore its weight, it was a curse, one that bound them to a boy whose eyes were holes, whose smile was never a smile, whose presence could not be denied. If this story is giving you chills, share it with a friend. By the early 1990s, the Turner photograph had entered an uneasy twilight. The family kept it sealed in a bank vault, away from curious eyes, yet its legend drifted further afield. The rise of paranormal interest in popular culture, the haunted house specials, late-night radio shows, and glossy magazines that promised evidence of the unknown, breathed new life into the story. Though the family tried to remain silent, outsiders spoke for them, spinning the tale into something half folklore, half fact. In 1992, a university lecturer in folklore studies, Dr. Helen Markham, stumbled across Edward Lawson's old 1935 journal article while conducting research into rural hauntings. Intrigued by the mention of a photograph in Larkstone, she tracked down more recent accounts, including Whitcomb's newspaper piece from the 1970s. Though she could not gain access to the original portrait, she pieced together enough to present a lecture at a conference in York. The paper she delivered was sober, academic, careful not to exaggerate. Yet when journalists covering the event picked up the story, they reduced it to a single line: "The cursed family photograph of Larkstone." That phrase spread quickly. Soon, the Turner portrait was listed in compendia of the supernatural alongside images of ghostly monks and spectral women. The family bristled at the publicity, but they were powerless to stop it. Anonymous callers began phoning their home at night, demanding to see the picture. Paranormal groups left letters at their door. Some offered money, some offered prayers, others issued warnings. The family withdrew further, determined to keep their secret safe. But secrecy falters in an age of curiosity. In 1997, a cousin estranged from the main branch of the Turners decided to profit from the legend. Claiming to have once seen the portrait in person, he described it in lurid detail to a tabloid. His account was embellished, filled with inventions. The face moved between viewings. The boy's expression shifted from a snarl to a grin, and blood could be seen at the corner of his mouth. Readers devoured it. Sales soared. The family raged. They knew the account was false, but once a lie enters print, it becomes part of the legend. Soon after, an amateur photographer attempted to recreate the Turner portrait by staging his own family outside a crumbling cottage. He manipulated the film to insert a shadowy face, then claimed it was real. When experts revealed the fraud, interest in the Turner's story only deepened. If people would go to such lengths to imitate the image, surely the original must have power. The arrival of the internet in the late 1990s changed everything. Forums dedicated to the paranormal buzzed with speculation. Threads titled "The Turner Family Curse" drew hundreds of replies. Grainy photocopies of the photograph, smuggled out from old magazines and reprinted without permission, began circulating online. Each copy degraded the image, yet somehow the extra face always remained, blurred but unmistakable, staring out of digital screens as it once had from sepia paper. Some swore the face appeared clearer on their monitors than in print. Others claimed that after viewing it, their homes grew cold, or their sleep was troubled by dreams of a child standing silently in the corner. By the year 2000, the Turner family found themselves hunted by technology. Anonymity was harder to maintain. Their names leaked onto message boards. Paranormal bloggers speculated on their address. A few even made the pilgrimage to Larkstone, walking its narrow lanes in search of the ivy-covered cottage. The family, weary of intrusion, sold the house at last. New owners moved in, oblivious to its reputation, though they soon complained that the ivy grew too fast, choking windows within months. They cut it back, but it returned thicker each year, as if the roots stretched deeper than the soil. Meanwhile, skeptics seized on the story. A team from a photography society published an article declaring the face to be nothing more than pareidolia, the human tendency to see patterns, especially faces, in random shapes. They argued that light, shadow, and the folds of fabric near Clara's skirt had combined to trick the eye. To prove their point, they demonstrated similar illusions created in their own photographs. For a time, this explanation satisfied some readers. Yet others pointed out that dozens of experts had examined the Turner portrait over the decades without dismissing it so easily. Pareidolia, they argued, could not explain the precise features, the hollowness of the eyes, or the curve of the mouth. It was too detailed, too deliberate. In 2003, the debate made its way to television. A documentary series on haunted Britain devoted an episode to Larkstone. Unable to obtain the actual photograph, the producers relied on interviews and recreations of it. They dramatized the plague years, spoke of Elias Cartwright, and filmed shadowy shots of ivy climbing stone. The episode concluded with the assertion that, whether real or imagined, the Turner portrait embodied the power of family memory. The family refused to watch it, yet their telephone rang incessantly for weeks afterward, strangers demanding to know where the photograph was kept. The vault became a prison for the picture, but also for the family itself. They could not display it, destroy it, or escape it. Each generation inherited the choice, to guard it in silence, or to share it and invite fresh intrusion. Most chose silence, though it brought little peace. In 2006, a young researcher named Daniel Reeves managed to persuade a Turner cousin to show him a copy of the photograph. One of the faded prints made in the 1970s. Reeves scanned it at high resolution and analyzed the image pixel by pixel. His conclusion startled even him. The face showed depth inconsistent with the rest of the image. Shadows fell across its features as if it had stood in the same light as the family, not as a flaw on the plate. Reeves presented his findings at a conference on anomalous photography. The reaction was mixed. Skeptics accused him of confirmation bias. Believers hailed it as proof. Reeves himself admitted he could not explain it. By now, the legend had taken on a life of its own, independent of the original photograph. On online forums, people posted their own family portraits, hoping to find hidden faces. Some swore they succeeded. One user uploaded an image of his grandparents in the 1950s, claiming a shadow child stood between them. Another shared a wedding photo in which a pale face hovered just behind the bride's shoulder. Each was dissected, dismissed, and defended. The Turner portrait became the touchstone by which all were measured, the standard of authenticity against which others were judged. Yet through all this, the actual photograph remained locked away. Few living eyes had seen it clearly. That may be why the story grew rather than faded. Mystery feeds on absence. What cannot be seen becomes more terrifying than what can. For the Turners, the weight did not lessen. By the late 2000s, younger family members debated selling the photograph to a museum or archive, placing it beyond their care. But older voices resisted. They feared that removing it from the family would break whatever fragile hold they had kept upon it. Better to guard the door themselves, they argued, than to let strangers fling it wide. Still, whispers persisted. Bank clerks swore the vault that held the portrait felt colder than any other. One cleaner claimed she heard tapping from inside the box. A guard on the night shift dreamed of a child pressing his face against the glass of the vault door. Such stories never made it into official reports, but they circulated quietly among the staff. And so the 21st century dawned with the Turner portrait suspended between secrecy and spectacle, between belief and denial. A relic of another time, yet alive in the imaginations of thousands who had never set foot in Larkstone. A photograph that refused to fade, demanding that generation after generation look closer, always closer, until the hollow eyes seemed to look back. By the time the second decade of the 21st century arrived, the Turner family's unwanted inheritance had become entangled with the restless currents of the digital age. The photograph itself remained sealed in a vault, untouched. Yet its legend multiplied endlessly across forums, blogs, and emerging platforms dedicated to the paranormal. What had once been whispered in village lanes now ricocheted across the world in seconds, stripped of context, embellished, transformed into 1,000 variations that all pointed back to the same chilling heart. The extra face in the family portrait. It began innocently enough. In 2011, a small website devoted to cursed objects of Britain published a short article on the Turner photograph, drawing upon Lawson's 1935 journal entry and Whitcomb's article from the 1970s. The piece included no image, only a vague sketch based on descriptions. But even this crude drawing unsettled readers. The site's traffic soared. Visitors demanded to see the real photograph. The site owner admitted he had never laid eyes on it, but the legend was enough. From there, the story spilled into larger corners of the internet, where it could not be contained. On YouTube, channels devoted to ghost stories and mysteries seized upon the tale. They dramatized the Turners' lives with grainy footage of ivy-covered cottages, ominous music swelling beneath narration that spoke of a child lost to plague, forever etched into glass. Some fabricated recreations of the image, splicing a pale face into sepia photographs. None matched the actual picture, yet the imitations only stoked curiosity. Commenters clamored for proof. "Show us the real one," they wrote again and again. The family, of course, refused. By now they had endured nearly a century of intrusion. They knew what exposure brought. Strangers at their doors, wild theories, and an unease that seeped into every corner of their lives. Still, the pressure mounted. In 2013, an anonymous user posted what he claimed was a leaked scan of the Turner portrait. The image was blurred, heavily compressed, its details indistinct. Yet there was, undeniably, a face near the mother's skirt, hollow-eyed, sharp-cheeked, its mouth hanging open in that uncanny half-breath. The debate raged online. Was the scan authentic, or another hoax crafted to draw attention? Experts analyzed it, with some declaring it too degraded to judge, while others insisted its proportions matched known descriptions. Believers noted the unusual sense of depth in the face, as though it stood in the same light as the rest of the family. Skeptics argued that compression artifacts had created the illusion. The family issued no statement. They could neither confirm nor deny. Silence was their only shield, but silence is brittle. In 2015, a documentary series on cursed photographs featured an episode titled "The Boy in the Ivy." Although the producers failed to obtain the original portrait, they dramatized the story using interviews with local historians, readings from Clara's diaries, and reenactments of the plague years. The broadcast reached millions. Suddenly, the Turner name was spoken again, this time not in hushed whispers but across dinner tables, classrooms, and office corridors. The family found themselves hounded by journalists seeking comment, their mailbox flooded with letters from believers and skeptics alike. Some pleaded for access, some offered money. A few chillingly threatened harm if they did not comply. The internet amplified everything. Online communities dissected every scrap of information, combing through parish records for references to Elias Cartwright and tracking property deeds to locate the ivy-covered cottage. Old photographs of Larkstone surfaced, each scrutinized for shadows. In comment sections, people shared dreams of the hollow-eyed boy, convinced the story itself had summoned him into their lives. For the younger Turners, the strain was unbearable. Some distanced themselves, changing their surnames, leaving the country, hoping that anonymity might grant them peace. Others embraced the legend, selling embellished versions of the story to publishers eager for content. Families fractured, cousins quarreled, accusations flew. One side insisted secrecy was their duty, the other argued that denial only made matters worse. And all the while, the portrait sat in its vault, unseen yet never dormant. In 2017, a peculiar incident renewed its menace. A bank employee conducting routine inventory reported that the Turner deposit box felt unusually cold to the touch. He dismissed it at first, blaming the air conditioning. But that night he dreamt of a boy pressing his face against glass, staring in with hollow eyes. When he returned to work the following morning, the vault corridor smelled faintly sweet, like flowers left too long in water. He mentioned this to a colleague only to learn that others had noticed the same scent lingering near the Turner box. Word spread quietly among the staff, though no official record was made. The timing was uncanny. That same week, an online influencer posted a video titled, "The Haunted Photograph They Don't Want You to See." In it, he recounted the Turner story with exaggerated flair, flashing doctored images and promising viewers that merely watching the video might bring the curse upon them. It went viral. Millions watched. Comments filled with nervous jokes, earnest warnings, and confessions of strange dreams. Whether coincidence or connection, the portrait's shadow stretched further than ever before. By 2019, the legend had slipped entirely out of the family's control. Paranormal conventions featured panels on the Turner photograph. Podcasts retold the story in serialized episodes, layering fact with fiction. Some claimed the boy in the picture had been sighted in other family portraits around Britain, as if his presence had multiplied. Others insisted the ivy itself was the actual vessel, a creeping hunger that spread wherever the story was told. The Turners, weary and divided, retreated further from public life, yet history has a cruel way of repeating itself. In 2020, during the long nights of isolation, interest in ghost stories surged online. The Turner photograph, already infamous, became a symbol of collective unease. Forums revived old threads. YouTube creators churned out new videos, their thumbnails featuring glowing red eyes and clickbait titles, "The Cursed Photo That Knows Your Name," and "The Ghost Boy Who Still Breathes." Viewership soared. People locked in their homes stared longer at screens, searching for fear to match their own. And still, the face stared back. One chilling account emerged from a viewer in Scotland. She wrote that after watching a video about the Turner portrait, she dreamed of a boy standing in the corner of her room, his eyes like holes, his mouth hanging open. When she woke, the ivy outside her window had grown across the glass overnight, though she had cut it back only the day before. Another viewer in Canada swore that his family portrait developed an unexplained shadow days after he learned the story. These accounts could not be verified, yet they spread quickly and became part of the legend. The Turner descendants debated once more. Should the photograph be destroyed? Some argued fire would end it, reduce it to ash, strip the face of its prison. Others whispered that destruction would not erase but release it, giving Elias, or whatever he had become, freedom beyond the frame. One elder insisted they had a duty to keep the photograph locked, to bear the burden as their ancestors had. Silence, secrecy, containment, that was their only defense. But secrecy falters, curiosity gnaws, and the world demands to see. By the early 2020s, the Turner portrait had become one of the internet's most enduring mysteries. Skeptics still argued it was nothing but light and shadow, pareidolia stretched thin by generations of fear. Believers countered with every eerie account, every diary entry, every coincidence. The truth remained sealed in that vault, waiting, as it always had. The story of the Turner photograph had always lived in shadows, whispered through generations, its legend stitched into the fabric of one family's sorrow. But in the second decade of the 21st century, those shadows spread wider, no longer bound to a quiet English village. The digital age did what centuries of gossip never could. It transformed the haunting into something global. No longer was the photograph a relic hidden in a trunk or locked in a vault. It was an idea, a presence, a face that appeared wherever fear found fertile ground. And so it was that by 2021, the Turner portrait had become a phenomenon far beyond the family's control. Videos retelling the story were viewed by millions worldwide. Podcasts dramatized the tale with chilling narration and music that swelled like the rising of a storm. Websites listed the photograph among the 10 most cursed objects in history, alongside the Hope Diamond and the Crying Boy paintings that were said to bring fire to every house they entered. The difference, however, was that the Turner photograph was not displayed, not studied, not passed between collectors. It remained hidden. Its power, people said, lay not in being seen, but in being imagined. The less it was revealed, the more people wanted it. the fewer eyes that beheld the original, the more its shadow multiplied in every retelling. For the family, this was the cruelest irony. Their silence, intended as a shield, had become fuel. The less they spoke, the louder others shouted on their behalf. The fewer details they gave, the more people invented. In forums and comment sections, arguments erupted. Some insisted the family should release the photograph at last to prove or disprove its reality. Others warned that releasing it would be catastrophic, that showing it to the world would open a door that should be left shut. And always at the center of the storm was the boy's hollow-eyed face, waiting. In Larkstone itself, the legend had become part of the village's identity. Tourists arrived with cameras, seeking ivy-covered cottages as if hoping to stumble upon the original scene. Local shopkeepers sold postcards of shadowy ruins and novelty haunted ivy trinkets. A pub renamed itself the Hollow Eyes, serving pints beneath a painted sign of a child's face peering from vines. Villagers grumbled at the intrusion, but money spoke louder than unease. And yet beneath the surface, fear lingered. Those who lived in Larkstone still spoke of strange noises at night, of ivy that grew too quickly, of children who dreamed of a boy whispering from the hedgerows. In 2022, a YouTube channel dedicated to paranormal investigations announced it had obtained a leaked copy of the Turner photograph. The video began with breathless narration, promising viewers they were about to see an image banned for over a century. The picture they showed was blurred, degraded, a generation removed from the already faint copies that had surfaced before. But still, there it was, the family standing stiffly, and the face, unmistakable, pressed against the little girl's side. The video went viral overnight. Comments flooded in. Some claimed to feel watched after seeing it. Others swore the face moved when they stared too long, its mouth twitching as if about to speak. Experts quickly denounced the copy as inconclusive, another recycled scan of dubious origin. But the damage was done. Once more, the boy in the ivy had stepped into the world's gaze, multiplying in pixels and screens across continents. For the Turners, the nightmare renewed. Strangers pounded on their door, begging for interviews, demanding the truth. Anonymous emails threatened to steal the photograph, to break into the vault if necessary. One relative was followed home by a man clutching a printout of the blurred image, demanding she admit the curse was real. Fear drove the family into more profound silence. But even silence has cracks. A younger member, frustrated by secrecy, wrote anonymously online, describing what he had seen during a rare viewing of the original. His words were chilling in their simplicity. The face is clearer than any copy. The eyes are holes. The mouth is open. It does not look dead. It looks like it is about to breathe. The post spread like wildfire. Readers dissected every phrase, analyzing his choice of words, debating whether it was authentic. The idea that the face was not a remnant of the dead, but something caught in the act of becoming alive, unsettled even seasoned skeptics. Was the photograph not a capture of a ghost, but a trap for something in between? A liminal presence, neither gone nor fully here, waiting to step across? This interpretation gained traction among paranormal theorists. Some argued that the photograph did not record a haunting, but created one. They suggested that when the camera clicked in 1902, it had not merely captured light and shadow, but opened a momentary fissure, a crack between worlds. Through that crack, something entered, eager to cling to the family that unwittingly invited it. Not Elias Cartwright, not Thomas Fletcher, not any name the parish records could supply. Something older, something hungry. In 2023, a new wave of interest surged when a popular streaming service released a dramatized miniseries loosely based on the Turner legend. Though names were changed, the story was clear. A cursed photograph, a family haunted through generations, a boy in the ivy who never aged, never left. The show was a success, sparking endless discussion online. Viewers posted freeze frames of shadows in the dramatization, convinced hidden faces lingered in the production itself. The line between fiction and reality became increasingly blurred. For the Turners, the series was salt in an old wound. They issued no statements, but relatives whispered that some had considered legal action, though what law could protect them from legend was unclear. Meanwhile, the ivy at the old Turner cottage continued to grow. The house had changed owners several times since the family sold it in the 2000s. Some stayed only a year or two before leaving, citing unease they could not name. One couple complained that their child refused to enter the garden, insisting a boy stood in the vines calling to him. Another family reported that photographs taken in the parlor developed streaks resembling a face, even on digital cameras. The house gained a reputation, though estate agents spoke only of its unique character when listing it for sale. Few buyers asked twice, and still the actual photograph remained in its vault, unseen by all but a handful of living eyes. The family argued endlessly about what to do. Burn it, some said. Lock it forever, others insisted. Please give it to a museum, a few argued, so that experts could at least study it with care. But no decision came. Fear froze them, as it had frozen their ancestors. Fear of destruction, fear of exposure, fear of what might happen if the boy was denied or revealed. In private, some descendants admitted to dreams. They dreamed of the face growing clearer, of the boy stepping out of the frame, of ivy creeping across vault walls in silence. One relative confessed to hearing a faint tapping whenever she visited the bank, as if fingernails brushed from within. Another swore she smelled the same sickly sweet odor Lawson had described nearly a century earlier. No one spoke of these things aloud, but all felt the weight of them. By the mid-2020s, the Turner photograph had become something larger than a relic. It was an idea passed from mind to mind, a face that could not be unseen once described. Even those who had never viewed it swore they knew what it looked like. In that way, it no longer mattered whether the photograph was real, whether the face was genuine. The story itself was alive, spreading through generations like the ivy, seeding itself in every imagination it touched. And perhaps that was the actual curse. Not the face, not the boy, not the photograph itself, but the telling of it. Each retelling gave it form. Each word kept it breathing. Each listener who shivered at the thought of hollow eyes and an open mouth offered it a little more life. The Turner family bore the burden, but the world carried the weight as well. The vault still holds the portrait. The ivy still grows on the walls of Larkstone. The face still waits, etched in silver nitrate, sharp as the day it was taken. And somewhere, perhaps even now, a child is whispering to someone unseen, laughing at jokes no one else can hear, turning their head as if listening to a voice rising softly from the leaves. So, if you ever come across a family photograph, look closely. Look at the shadows, the corners, the folds of fabric. Look where no one thought to look before. And if you see another face, one that should not be there, do not stare too long. Please do not call it by name. For once it knows you've seen it, it may never look away. Subscribe for more chilling stories where history and mystery intertwine. Like this video, leave a comment if you felt the shiver of hollow eyes, and above all, remember, some photographs never fade,